Thanks for being here this evening. Seems like it's been an awfully long time since we've had a public hearing in this room. But as we all know, we're here for... okay, I'll talk as loudly as I can. Is that better? There are some empty seats up at the front. I think the municipal clerk is turning up the volume. How's that? I'll continue to speak as loudly as I can. So tonight is the public hearing for Land Use Bylaw 2018-22 and the MDP Amendment 20... Pardon me, that better? And the MDP Amendment 2018-27. And I guess note to self, when you're at that microphone, also speak loudly. Just for clarity, I'll go through the process, although many people in the room are familiar with it. So once I've called the public hearing to order, there will be an administrative briefing. Then there will be questions of clarification from council to administration. And then the next step is the public submissions. And of course, typically, the public hearing is for a bylaw that people may want to voice opposition to or support for or neutrality on. This is a little different. We're really just here to listen to your general perspective on whatever section of the land use bylaw you would like to speak to this evening. So I'm not going to be looking for or against or any of that. It'll just be when we get to that point, if you want to form a line or just put your hands up and people can take their turns at the mic. And of course, council will be here until everybody who wants to speak has had the opportunity to speak. There is a 5-minute maximum for oral presentation. And of course, everybody is entitled to, and most of you, I'm sure, have already provided written submissions. After the after the public submissions, after the meeting adjourns, actually, the municipal clerk will publish a record of public submissions that includes all written submissions received regarding this matter, and regardless of whether the author is present this evening or not. After that, there is an opportunity for any final administrative comments, and then I will adjourn the public hearing. And as always, I encourage everybody in the room to be respectful. I'm certain you will be, because we always are here in Canmore. There really is no need to be cheering or applauding or booing, anything like that. Just listen to what each of us has to say. Council is here to listen. That's our role tonight, and we're certainly not here to debate or become engaged in any kind of conversation in that way. We're really here to listen to your feedback, your perspective on the draft bylaws approved at first reading. And speaking for myself, I've been looking forward to this opportunity to do exactly this, is hear directly from the public on what's a very complicated bylaw, and no doubt will take some time yet to work through the legislative process. And with that, I'll call the public hearing to order and look to Mr. Fish to speak from administration.
Great. I'm really just introducing the administrative presentation here. Just a quick reminder that there are 2 bylaws and there's 1 public hearing for both bylaws, so people are welcome to address either or both. I suspect most people will be wanting to address the land use bylaw 2018-22, but a reminder that there is the MDP amendment primarily around Steep Creek's 2018-27. So if you have specific comments, please address those specific comments to each of those bylaws. But I will now pass it over to Ms. Ramos-Strankman, who is going to provide an introduction to most of the land use bylaw, and then Ms. Watenko will complete the land use bylaw and complete the introduction to the MDP amendment. So,
thank you.
Further ado.
And just one last reminder, when you are at the mic speaking, you're speaking to council and not to your friends in the audience, so please direct your comments directly to council.
Hello, and thank you. Let me know if you can't hear me in the back. My name is Camila Ramos-Strakeman, and as Alaric mentioned, I'll just provide a quick overview of the land use bylaw and key changes before I pass it on. We are here tonight to discuss the proposed new land use bylaw 2018-22. The intent of the land use bylaw is to build a community based on the town's MDP and to regulate use and development of land and buildings within our boundary. Now, the current land use bylaw has required a number of changes to it. These changes have stemmed from the bylaw being dated, specific council direction, changes to the Municipal Government Act, and just general public input. Overall, these changes were significant enough to warrant presenting a completely new bylaw rather than just a large-scale amendment. The proposed new land use bylaw was accepted for first reading by council on November 20th, 2018, and this was after public engagement and stakeholder meetings throughout the spring and summer. Since then, we have worked to inform the community of these changes with a large mail-out to every residence in Canmore, an online survey, and 2 open houses that were held in January. Results of the open houses and the online survey are now available on the Town of Canmore website, and the information collected will also be presented to council as additional information for their consideration. These public engagements were done in addition to our statutory requirements to hold a public hearing in order to reach out to more people and gather additional input on the bylaw. The next steps include, following this meeting, administration will be reviewing feedback from the public hearing and our public engagement. And based on the feedback we receive, changes to first reading of the new bylaw will occur and be presented to council at a second reading. However, should these revisions be major, an additional public hearing will be held. And with that, I'll just go into particular topics. I'll just provide a brief overview of these key topics. This won't address every single change in the bylaw. I can't summarize 600 pages very easily, but just to give you guys a background on some of the key changes. The intent of changes to accessory dwelling units are to make them easier to obtain. Affordable housing is a challenge in Canmore, and accessory suites are one way to address this need. In order to do this, accessory dwelling units are being permitted in more areas of Canmore. However, there will also be a distinction between attached accessory dwelling units and detached accessory dwelling units. Detached ADUs are going to be proposed, or detached accessory dwelling units that will be more than 1 story in height are going to require a development permit, needing an additional review from administration. Another regulation around this is due to parking. Parking is proposed, requiring a parking stall will be optional for accessory dwelling units if the property is located within 1,000 meters of the town center or within 450 meters of a transit. The Municipal Development Plan states that in order to promote sustainable housing design and to limit the impacts of housing massing in existing neighborhoods, the town may adopt a maximum dwelling unit size in residential neighborhoods. There currently exists a house size restriction within portions of the R1 district, and in order to meet the intent of the MDP, this restriction is proposed to expand to all of R1, R1A, and R1B districts, or the areas you can see on this map. Changes to employee housing are also proposed to occur. As another method to address housing, new visitor accommodation and hostel developments along Bow Valley Trail in that map will be required to provide employee housing. There are also some design considerations on top of the ratio that's provided on the slide that identify housing to be on-site and to be separate from the hotel units or hostel units. There are also proposed to be changes to our miscellaneous land use districts. The miscellaneous land use districts have historically had a lot of overlap between them in both description and permitted uses. This has made it difficult to plan around these areas and just to classify them and make distinctions from one to another. To make these districts more distinct, purpose statements have been reworded and uses revised. There has also been the redistricting of some areas, such as the UR1, which has been moved to an overlay district. And the NP district, which classifies only Quarry Lake, is proposed to become conservation of wildlands and a public use district. Changes are proposed to occur in the parking requirements as well. With a new integrated transportation plan that was created last year, the planning and engineering departments are both working on ways to change the ways we move around town. Some of these changes will occur outside of the land use bylaw, but the proposed new land use bylaw will see an overall parking reduction for every single use in Canmore. In addition to this, bicycle parking requirements will also be established for both short-term and long-term bicycle stalls. And depending on where developments are in town, some reduction factors may be applicable to automobile parking stalls. These will come into effect depending on the distance from a transit stop, proximity to our downtown, and if there are shared parking management strategies. And now on top of this, there are some optional reduction factors that may be able to be applied for depending on the development. One example would be for developments to have unbundled parking. The existing method to calculate building height does not easily apply to flat roofs, homes with very complex roofs. The current building height calculation has issues around interpretation, and administration spends a great deal of time at SDAB regarding our height calculation. Therefore, we are making some changes in hopes to resolve some of these problems. What our change is we are proposing to create a new model to calculate building height in addition to the model we currently use today. This model is called the envelope model, and it would be using district-specific setbacks to create an envelope around where a building could be. Essentially, if a building fits inside this envelope, it will be permitted to be built, but if it does not, it wouldn't be, without getting too much into the details of that. New regulation around FireSmart was approved by Council in March of last year, and after a summer of reviewing this regulation, administration feels that it is overly restrictive and is recommending the removal of most of this regulation until a more thorough review of these FireSmart regulations can be developed. In the interim, the new land use bylaw will regulate that all new roofs maintain a minimum of Class B roofing material and that any habitable buildings require a 1.5 meter area of non-combustible landscaping surrounding the building. Additionally, landscaping requirements have reduced the ratio of coniferous trees from 60 to 25%. The signage section of the bylaw has also been reviewed as there was a need to modernize this section. The signage section of the existing land use bylaw has been challenging to interpret and does not provide clear regulation or as clear of regulation as administration would like to see. This proposed section has now become more clear in both the layout and the wording and identifies relief as a requirement. This is intended to result in better looking and higher quality signs. And there has also been the removal of the dark background preference that currently exists in our bylaw. The individual signage types have also been reviewed and modified, and now chalkboard and menu signs have been added to this section. I will now pass this on to Tracy Butenko, who will comment on Steep Creek changes on the land use bylaw.
Great, thanks. It's still cold outside. And thanks to everybody for coming out, even though it's really cold. We really appreciate your feedback. I'm going to just talk quickly about Steep Creek hazards. We've been working through this regulation since 2016, 15, since we reviewed the municipal development plan. And so everything that we're doing within the land use bylaw is following out of that municipal development plan policy set. And so the proposed regulation in the new land use bylaw is, here's one of the maps, this is the Cougar Creek map, to create 3 different hazard areas. There's a high, a moderate, and a low hazard area. In the high hazard area, new development would be restricted. And in a moderate area, development would be limited to where you can prove that the risk is acceptable to the town of Canmore. And then in the yellow zone, as with all other zones, if you are allowed to do development, there might be some local design mitigations. And those local design mitigations are being created right now in our engineering design and construction guidelines. Our engineering department is working on that. It also would outline how you do a risk assessment if you are in a moderate hazard zone. So we hope to have those engineering design and construction guidelines to present to council within the next little while as well, to correspond with when the new land use bylaw may be adopted. And through this process, since council gave the bylaw first reading, council has also been presented with some new information. So for second reading, we will probably be bringing back some revised, and these are technical reports, but there may be some changes to the mapping. So for example, on January 22nd, we presented the Echo Canyon Creek and the XYZ Creek hazard reports to council, and this is the mapping that would come out of those hazard reports. We did send letters to all of the landowners who were included in the hazard areas, so they have been informed of this change. The other mapping things that might change for second reading is that there's also some technical reports going on to better identify what the study areas are. So for example, Three Sisters Creek, there's quite a large study area that we have identified, and some more detailed reports are coming out indicating that the study area can actually be reduced until we have those final hazard maps. So council, please look forward to seeing those updated technical maps at second reading. And to make sure that the land use bylaw, this proposed regulation, is consistent with what we have adopted in the municipal development plan, we've now looked back to what we did adopt in the MDP, and some of that policy we've recognized is probably better kept as regulation within the land use bylaw. And that's the nature of the changes made here. It's to ensure that there's consistency and that things are in their right place as the type of statutory document. But the changes should be consistent. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Is there anything else from administration? Nope. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So are there any questions from members of council to administration for clarification? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was wondering if administration could explain to me why employee housing is only being proposed on Bow Valley Trail for visitor accommodation units or hotels that are up and coming.
So for a number of years, more than 5, council has been seeking, and through the Comprehensive Housing Action Plan, a solution to employee housing in a way that we could generate some additional employee housing either through new development or through existing business properties. We tried in, I believe it was 2008, 2009, so over 10 years ago, and got bogged down in a development approach. Instead, a couple of years later, we tried an assessment-based approach. And again, we couldn't get unanimity amongst stakeholders and agreement on how to move forward. We have put together some other strategies more recently last year and in 2017, and again, we even brought it forward to council as part of a land use bylaw amendment for first reading. Again, there were too many concerns with how it was being approached. So to see some results, we've proposed what is generally the biggest generator of employee housing, hotels, but certainly not exclusively, and instead looked at sites where they may more easily be able to incorporate employee housing on the site of a development, and so that's what's being proposed now along the Bow Valley Trail. Absolutely, is it administration's intent? It is administration's intent over the long term to put together a more broadly reaching employee housing policy that may include or could include some assessment-based for existing businesses, as well as development regulations for new businesses. But we're trying to find the sweet spot between addressing the issues, but also not putting so many hurdles in place that employee housing requirements sort of stifle new business development. Does that answer your question? That was a very long answer.
Yes, but I guess there's other places in Canmore where resort
Yes.
accommodation or
Okay.
hotels are going to be proposed or are proposed. I'm guessing I
Yes.
know the answer to the question.
Thank you, sorry.
But I wanted to hear.
I'll try and
from you.
answer that piece. So currently in Spring Creek Mountain Village, Three Sisters Mountain Village, as well as Silvertip Resort area, all three of those areas include employee housing requirements as part of their area structure plan or area redevelopment plan. So Bow Valley Trail is the largest area that is not covered under employee housing requirements currently. Other commercial areas really are the town center and gateway district, where visitor accommodation is possible, but there are not large sites available for development or redevelopment there that would be easy to incorporate the employee housing on site. Hence, the town center and gateway district were left out.
Great, thanks. That's the answer I thought it
Okay,
was, but
sorry.
I thought I'd ask
Thank
it
you.
publicly. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this time from members of council to administration? Seeing none, thanks very much for that brief report. So at this point then, we will move into the public submission stage. And as I suggested earlier, because there's not really a for and against sort of input expectation here, it'll really be just take your 5 minutes and share your perspective on whatever aspect of the land use bylaw, the draft bylaw that you prefer. And I'm sure 5 minutes may not be enough for some folks, so don't forget that written submissions are equally valuable and certainly read and inform council's final decisions or later decisions. I don't know if people like the idea of lining up, or do you want to stay in your seats and show by hand that you'd like to speak? I don't know, are you folks lined up? Okay, I guess we're going to do the lining up thing. And please be sure to give your name clearly for the municipal clerk.
Your Worship, councillors, good to see you again. My name is Lawrence Hill. I'm a local builder and potential infill land developer. I didn't have a chance to speak to council last week, so I'm taking this opportunity today to talk about a bylaw that I work with on a weekly, if not daily basis. A comprehensive update to the LUB is long overdue, so I'm pleased that this council is undertaking to do so. I was fortunate to have participated in the meetings between administration and BOTA, during which we had a meaningful and fruitful discussion on the proposals. In the past, there have been unsuccessful attempts to have secondary suites legal in some single-family neighborhoods. I am most supportive and hopeful that Council will now adopt this community-wide inclusion, which will increase the universe of safe rental units throughout Canmore. 3.5 years ago, I was responsible for a novel proposal that called for secondary suites to be included in some affordable duplexes. So I'm gratified to see that ADUs will now also be permitted in all duplex areas. We've just completed a new duplex in Stewart Creek, where one side has a legal suite in the walkout lower level. This was when I first became aware of the town's requirement in section 8.4.0.1.d to squeeze the duplex's 2 double garage driveways into the same 5-meter width at the sidewalk as the double garage on the single-family homes across the street. Unless they are built on deep lots, triplexes are even more disadvantaged. Restricting the driveway widths for duplexes and triplexes to the same 5-meter width as single homes doesn't seem to be consistent with the town's desire to have more rather than less density. I understand one of the goals is to increase on-street parking spaces between driveways, but frustrated homeowners will put gravel down on both sides to widen their driveways, just like they do on Lawrence Grassy Ridge, where Three Sisters also mandated 2.5-meter driveways 20 years ago. The problem will be exacerbated where ADUs are included in duplexes because renters will park on the street rather than their designated hard-to-access driveway locations. So, rather than have a disincentive for zoning duplexes and triplexes and having ADUs within duplexes, change the driveway width formula. 4 meters for a single-family lot, up to 16 meters in width, and for both duplexes and triplexes, 4 meters per double garage and 2.5 meters for single garage. An incentive to encourage ADUs that would not cost the town any money would be to forego charging off-site levies for ADUs. Both of these concepts could be included in new LUB if it was to go back out for consideration by the community. I am heartened to see that the town is now considering how to have more employee housing built, but I think the current direction is too narrow and should be reconsidered as a requirement to contribute from a broader segment of not only the business community, but also our whole community. We all benefit by providing a reasonable quantity and quality of accommodation for all of the people who work here. The proposed reconsideration of what's appropriate and realistic to meet the Fire Smart guidelines is much needed. However, my only quibble with what's considered combustible vegetation, and in particular ground cover within 1.5 meters of the building, if every house has to have gravel or rocks along the entire length of the side yards, those areas are going to be very bleak. If wood mulch is allowed, at least there would be some affordable variation in those typically shady areas. In the day, Alpine Homes used bark mulch for ground cover in those locations, and I doubt if that material could be lit on fire even with a blowtorch. Lastly, to finish on a positive note, I'm thrilled that we're finally going to have an optional formula for calculating roof heights. Rather than wasting so many people's time and money going to SDAB over well-designed single-pitch roofs, we'll be able to easily agree with planning staff on what can be approved and built within the envelope. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Kathy Jones. I'd rather be around the board table having wine with all of you discussing this than to be here. I am one of 5 women who in 1996 spearheaded the process to save the 240 acres at Quarry Lake. And along with thousands of other people in Canmore at that time, we are very excited that we were successful. I am submitting a request to keep Quarry Lake Park of 240 acres intact as a park as it was determined legally, socially, and morally in 1996. In 1996, we were very grateful and excited to have the opportunity to make it a park. We, as the citizens of Canmore at that time, knew Canmore would grow out to its fullest within its very defined boundaries. We knew that one piece of a healthy environment for any population was to have a place of peace in its natural state of nature, undisturbed by the noise of growth like cars, trucks, buses, construction, crowds. Now, 22 years later, the forecast proves to be true. We are in good company of places across Canada who have recognized this and dedicated land to parks. They have to date not been sacrificed in the name of growth. Vancouver's Stanley Park, Calgary's Nose Hill, Toronto's High Park, and beyond to the East Coast. It has been respected as a place for the wildlife as much as for humans. It is only recently, with another larger influx of visitors, that thoughtless behavior has surfaced. I took the opportunity to meet with Michael Fark, which I so appreciated, I was the student to learn what is actually happening. Part of the piece of changing the title of Quarry Park are other little bits. One of those other little bits was to fence a piece of the dog park. We have discussed a volunteer ambassador training program. These volunteers would be at the quarry parking lot ready to educate visitors. It would be learning in the moment when learning was viewed as needed. If the money for fences could move to a training program with volunteers, we, the users of Quarry Park, would be very excited. Public district use is a long, long list. I couldn't learn that very well. But a list I believe all of you have known to be needed, to be prominent in your mind over the last 6 years. A list that you have heeded along the way. You do not have an easy task, and your intent to do the right thing is appreciated. So it baffles me that keeping a park agreement is not being held as valuable public use district. Please uphold the 1996 success of having a Canmore Park for its people. Please uphold its value as the town grows. Please do not take it away in any amount. We as humans have a way of allowing one idea will take an inch, but soon a mile. Please keep it intact.
Thank you very much.
My name is Alan McFadgen. I'm making a presentation on behalf of BOCORD. Your Worship, Council, as you may know, BOCORD was founded initially in 1992 at the time of the NRCB hearings, and since then has been making presentations on almost all issues that come up related to land use in the valley that impacts upon the wildlife corridors. I would also note that it was about 20 years ago that the town's IRC committee, with I think Ron Casey as chairman and Andre Garreau on it, brought forward the idea of wildlands conservation zoning. And the Wildlands Conservation District has remained Canmore's gold standard for conservation. The land uses in the 2010 land use bylaw reflect the strong commitment that the community and council has had to protect wildlife in the Bow Valley. The areas covered by WC zoning include most of the a number of the wildlife corridors like Stewart Creek, the Dead Man's Flats, Pigeon Corridor, the corridor above Silvertip, and also the Larch Islands. We think it's very important that this protection be continued in the new land use bylaw. In fact, I would argue that given the growth in Canmore, the pressure on the environmental resources around the town are going to become even greater. And therefore, it's, the land uses protection for wildlife corridors becomes even more significant. Our feeling is that the new land use bylaw should be at least as protective as was the 2010 land use bylaw. And we have several concerns in that regard that I would like to raise. Most of them relate to WC zoning, but I would note that the ED Environmental District, the permitted use of wildlife corridors and habitat has been deleted, and an addition has been added for low-impact recreational uses. And as Kathy was saying, the NP district is being replaced and Quarry Park is being bifurcated and squeezed quite uncomfortably, I think, into CW and PD district. We have some concern about that. With specific regard to CW, Regulation 5.4.43 adds new uses of purposes other than trails, individual benches, or picnic tables. And we do have some concern that these might be permitted within the wildlife corridor and habitat areas. Our general feeling is that the new land use bylaw does not fully protect the permitted use of wildlife corridors and habitat. Under the 2010 wildlife conservation zoning, it was deemed to protect extensive land areas outside urban development with no uses allowed other than two. One was existing developments on a specific site approved prior to December 7th, 1999. That was third reading of bylaw 09-99. We're glad to see that that has been retained in the proposed 2018 bylaw. Also, accessory uses to developments approved prior to third reading of bylaw 09-99 were allowed in the 2010 bylaw. This has been reworded in a way that is more broad. Our opinion would be that this should be brought back with the more restrictive reading that was in the 2010 land use bylaw. The Planning Department's intention to extend the CW district to cover more land is very welcome from Beaucourt's point of view. However, this CW areas include public parks within or directly adjacent to urban development. This includes Quarry Lake, of course. While the new regulation may be appropriate for a public park, where recreational uses such as benches, picnic tables, or basic sanitary facilities are allowed, these land uses should not be reciprocal. The danger is that if picnic tables and other uses are all right in zoning in a downtown park, then they would also be okay in the middle of large land use zone WC, like a wildlife corridor. One size does not necessarily fit all. What applies for the park area is not necessarily appropriate for the wildlands conservation areas. Perhaps what is needed is a P for Park District, which protects all public park areas in Canada, in Canmore, and allows for low-impact recreational development, but development which would not be appropriate on fully protected CW lands. That's the bulk of my presentation. We have a longer presentation we'll submit to you, which includes some comparison tables we've made of the old land use bylaw and the new one with respect to wildlands conservation. And we also have 3 very specific recommendations we're making with regard to the wording of the land use bylaw. So I'll pass that on for you to read as well.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to put this down. Hello, my name is Jessica Carpat. I'm here speaking on behalf of Quantum Place and Three Sisters Mountain Village, but I'm here in my capacity more as planner than as person who's pushing forward development in Canmore. So that's the lens in which, or under which, I reviewed the land use bylaw. I focused on my professional background as a planner and tried to review it with the lens of what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve in Canmore in order for this new bylaw to be adopted. And one of the things that was written on the website was that it was for clarity of language, for easily to be understood, and also for alignment with the municipal development plan. And with that in mind, I'm reviewing this bylaw under a number of different themes. And these different themes are to be outcomes focused, for the bylaw to be measurable and enforceable, for the bylaw to be easy to read and understand, and that there's a fair and equitable application of rules throughout the bylaw. And so rather than nitpick different sections within the bylaw, I really wanted to be more, I guess, high level in my review of the bylaw. And so what do I mean by plain language? What I mean is that currently the tendency for land use bylaws and more modernized land use bylaws is to go with clear and easy to understand terms. So definitions are more colloquial. So instead of, say, for instance, using visitor accommodation, you would use a use term like hotel, because people are more familiar with that term. Also, using an active voice within your land use bylaw. Instead of saying something like, the setback will be or shall be X meters, you say the setback is something. So it's a clarity of language that is found within a bylaw that makes the bylaw much more easily understood. And of course, the definitions would require a lot of work in order to do that.
Again, this active voice and clarity of interpretation allows for better interpretation when applications go to SDAB, but they also allow for the community to better understand your regulations and the regulations that they live within. So while the real estate development industry is using that to build communities, at the end of the day, the ultimate user is the person that is actually living in your community. So having that plain language component is really important. So outcomes focused. A bylaw should be in other bylaw or other municipalities. Bylaws are more outcomes focused. So they don't focus on what you don't want to achieve. You want to focus on what you do want to achieve. So currently, and I just Googled it, or searched it in my PDF, there's 200 occurrences or over 200 occurrences of shall not in the land use bylaw. And so, think about how we want to frame our language, and what we really want to achieve is really how we should move forward with this land use bylaw. Another thing that we can do for improvement with is employee housing. Employee housing currently is defined as a use. And when we look at employee housing, really what we're trying to regulate is making sure that it's a requirement. And when we define it as a use versus a requirement, what we're creating is a segmentation of a whole population. Those people live here. They're the workers of our community, but they're not integrated into our community. And to me, that's a concern. And so when I'm looking at how the bylaw is regulating employee housing, you really want to make sure that it's a requirement that is equitable and fair and applied across uses, not across an area. Another aspect of the bylaw that I think needs a little bit of working on is removing policy from the bylaw. Often what we have within the land use bylaw is a policy intention that is trying to be framed as a regulation. A good example of that would be in the administration section, I believe, on railway guidelines. We have the Federation of Canadian Municipalities document that governs it. That governs it, and what really we should be doing is just saying, here's the regulation, follow this policy, and we can move forward from there. There are some administrative level changes too, very quickly, on steep creeks. We do have a concern that steep creeks are every time a new report would be requested or created, a whole new bylaw amendment would be required. And so I think we can write the bylaw in such a way where the steep creek reports are required, they're required to be complied with, but we don't need to provide or do an administrative amendment to update mapping every single time. I just think that makes it easily handled.
I'm going to ask that you wrap it up now. There's a lot of people waiting to speak. You can provide all of that, of course, in written submission, and we will see it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did we adjust that? My name is Ron Rempel, and I'm speaking on behalf of Bow Valley Builders and Developers Association, BODA. We've reached out to our members in the review of the land use bylaw. And these are the members that use the land use bylaw on a regular basis: planners, designers, builders, developers. And that's how we've established our input for the BODA's recommendations for the land use bylaw review. And first of all, I believe that town admin has been proactive at encouraging the public to get involved in the land use bylaw, getting engaged with that, been responsive to our requests for discussion on it as well. So I just want to say thank you for that. Overall, as Jessica was just saying, we believe that there's an opportunity during the land use bylaw review to update and to simplify the bylaw and the regulations. So our members have expressed concern that the land use bylaw is not being simplified and modernized enough through this review process. The fact that we have a new consulting team coming on board now, after 9 months of discussion, public consultation, first reading, we think that's a good opportunity to take a step back and ensure that the document receives a comprehensive review. BODA's planner, designer, builder members, again, that have significant experience working with land use bylaws from other municipalities, have committed to provide feedback to the consultant on the overarching best practices review to ensure that the end result, again, is a clear, cohesive document that's easy to use and understand, not just by the real estate development community, but by everybody within the community as well. We provided a pretty thorough response, 27 pages. I'm not going to go through that with the time that I have, so I'm just going to touch on a few issues. We support the inclusion of attached accessory dwelling units in the district's proposed. It's one way to address affordability issue without unduly impacting the neighborhood. We support the detached accessory dwelling units as permitted uses for single-story and discretionary for one-story plus loft. However, we have a significant concern about the size restrictions of the 30 square meters for the loft areas. We believe that in an effort to reduce the potential massing impact on neighbors, the pendulum has swung too far. We recommend a gross floor area of livable space for lofts of 50 square meters, which would allow for adequate living space for 1 to 2 people. BODA is strongly opposed to the recommendation on reducing house sizes and to the discussion of reducing houses to a maximum of 2 stories. The MDP notes that the town is to utilize the tools at its disposal to limit house sizes, specifically limiting lot sizes, providing appropriate setback requirements, and limiting the height of buildings. We believe that these tools alone are really all that is necessary for the town to limit the size of houses. If the town wishes to reduce house sizes, then future subdivisions could result in both smaller lots and allow for smaller houses. However, if the town's goal is really to further increase sustainability for larger houses, then what we've proposed in our submission is that there could be the requirement that homes greater than 350 square meters be built to a higher green building standard. We think that that addresses the issue of sustainability, and we believe that that's the direction that this was supposed to go. Regarding employee housing, we believe that this is a step in the right direction. As Mr. Fish mentioned, that the main developable, or the main developed areas, Silvertip, Spring Creek, Three Sisters, they have a requirement for employee housing. We believe it should be fair and equitable. However, we think that there needs to be some changes to what is being proposed. We've put that into our submission as to what those could be. And we believe that meaningful consultation with the hotel industry needs to occur before second reading to ensure that the regulations are fair, equitable, and relevant. BODA and CHLA members, and possibly chamber members, BIA members as well, should be part of that consultation to make sure that those regulations are implementable. Regarding the Steep Creek mapping, it was good to see that some of those changes are being made, and we just believe that it's critical to ensure that the study areas and hazard mapping is correct and fully up to date prior to second reading so that all areas are accurately identified. Regarding parking, there's a very small window between minimum parking requirements and maximum amounts before a variance is required. We think that's a little bit too prescriptive. In regards to the building heights, it is good to see the envelope model being proposed. However, we think that there should be an allowance for additional living space in the loft area in the middle portion of the building, which will have minimal impact on neighboring properties, but still meeting the intent of the bylaw. We provided an example of how this could work in our written submission. So thank you for the opportunity to review the land use bylaw and to provide our recommendations to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. Cheryl Cooper. I'm the co-chair of the Bow Valley Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mayor Borman and council members, for your effort to engage the public regarding the important issues contained in the newly proposed land use bylaw. These are obviously issues that affect all of us and are really important to our community members and our businesses in our community. As I'm here representing the Bow Valley Chamber of Commerce, I will focus my comments on the concerns in the land use bylaw that directly impact our business members. The first one, of course, is being signage. As previously expressed to council in a letter from our past president, Janet Neistat, in January of this year, our concern for the issue of temporary signage remains unaddressed despite efforts to engage with the Town of Canmore's planning department. We engaged in several meetings with the planning department over the course of several months in order to come to a equitable resolution of this issue and come up with a reasonable solution, only to be told that we were not going to get any resolution to this issue for our business members. We felt that this wasn't an acceptable response to the concerns that we have, and we feel like our time was really just wasted in this effort. So in the documentation that was presented and prepared to the town following our discussion, we had proposed a number of different possible options, including allowing in commercial zones that make sense, so obviously not the downtown core or the gateway community, allowing dailies on busy tourism days, Thursday through Sunday, so perhaps not on the busier days of the week. And then specific guidance on size, material, and graphics would be also applied just to ensure that we're fitting with the aesthetic that we wish to maintain in our community, and then ensuring safety and appropriate anchorage for these signs. So we really just want to make sure that we are engaged in an ongoing discussion about this. I think that there was some proposed changes with the chalkboard signs and the menu signs that are outlined in sections 10.4.8 and 10.4.8.2, but they don't provide an acceptable solution to the concerns of the businesses that we represent and operate outside of the town center and gateway districts. So if you can make regulations that are specific to some of these other districts, then why can't we try to have regulations that are applied to some of these other areas in town, like the Bow Valley Trail, Elk Run, Three Sisters, and the other industrial areas where these businesses are certainly going to be increasing in the future. The other point I think that impacts our businesses directly would be the parking. I feel like there needs to be some further clarification about what those regulations are for us to be able to comment on behalf of our businesses. The requirements seem similar to the signage bylaw in that they're being applied across the board without consideration for regional differences. We are open to be and would like to be engaged in these discussions along with all of the members of the administration of the town of Canmore, and look forward to the opportunity to revisit these issues on behalf of the businesses that we represent. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Evening. My name is Ron Casey, and we have to stop meeting like this. Believe me, I'd like us to stop meeting like this. This is going to be a little bit disjointed because, of course, the land use bylaw is a little disjointed. It covers everything from soup to nuts, and so I'll just try to hit a few of the points that I think were more salient as I went through the document. First one being employee housing on Bow Valley Trail. In the Bow Valley Trail section, so 3.5.8.7, we talk about employee housing. We also talk about staff accommodation. They're one and the same, virtually. In fact, they are the same, except for the fact that staff accommodation refers to the fact that you're an employee of the business. So the business is providing you with a place to live. Staff accommodation is simply housing that is eligible to be occupied by an employee. And the references to section 14 in the definitions for employee, and in that definition, it opens it up to employees of the MD of Bighorn, of Banff National Park, and of Banff. So what we're asking someone to do is provide housing that is opened up, and in fact it opens up our much valuable housing in this community to everyone in the Bow Valley to legally occupy. So I think we need to think about that overall. But maybe going back to Jessica's presentation, I really feel it's a mistake to be talking about employee housing or staff accommodation. We should be talking about housing. This whole section needs to be expanded. It's not just hotels that generate employees and generate need. And so if you look at the requirements in Three Sisters or Silvertip or in virtually any other place that has a staff housing requirement right now, it talks about employee generation analysis. When you generate X number of employees, never mind your square footage, you can have 10 square feet, yet you can employ 100 people. So square footage isn't necessarily a gauge, nor is number of rooms, nor are seats in a restaurant, nor are. I think there's better ways to do this, but this whole section, in my opinion, I know everyone was keen to do something. This is something. I'm not sure it's the right thing. I think it needs to be expanded to encompass a housing strategy for the town of Canmore that incorporates a variety of options, a variety of solutions, and we'll see our employees with places to live. The Quarry Lake Natural Park rezoning to PD. There's a huge list of discretionary uses there. Everything from schools to campgrounds to recreational facilities to, I don't know, private schools, daycares, be a good spot for daycare. And you know, so if the intent of changing the zoning from natural park to PD is to in fact open the door so that someone may apply for those uses, of course, you have to be listed as a use before you can apply for the use. So as long as we have that great long list, then there's a potential that someone's going to come along and apply for one of those and be approved. If we want to keep it a park, then my feeling is we need to look at just returning it to the natural park designation, or as a poor second choice, throw it into the ED district, the entire thing, so create an environmental district, because that at least doesn't have a list of 10 or 15 discretionary uses that someone may or may not apply for down the road. Section 7.5. This is a little bit of a, you sort of skip by this one quickly. It's the subsurface hazard overlay district. This was previously UR1. Ooh, geez. This was previously UR1. My feeling is that overlay needs to include all of Three Sisters lands because subsurface hazards is a reality in that case. And I'll have to jump right to the very end. I do think that this bylaw does not coincide with the MDP. And the reason for that being, we talk about environment time and time again in the MDP. We talk about how that is important to this community in a variety of perspectives. Yet we continue to encourage and allow 3,500 square foot houses to be built, plus 600 square foot garages on that. So let's call it 4,000 square foot homes, as well as duplexes of equal size per side. If that's environmental, when we know for a fact that most of these are not going to be occupied by permanent residents, then I'm not sure how, or I've never seen anyone explain to me how that could possibly be environmentally sensitive or considerate. So I think we need to find a way to address that and bring them into compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Casey, there's a question
Mr. Casey?
from Councillor McCallum.
Backs with that new hip,
Well,
eh?
a question. Well, I saw the door. I get the hell out of here.
My question is that in your submission, do you provide some recommendations as to the last point you just made?
No, because I didn't do a written submission.
Well, you've got time.
Yeah, well, maybe. I guess my written submission would simply be that I think Ron Rempel touched on it earlier, that not to limit the size, but to look at side yards, front yards, rear yards, and heights, and confine the size of these structures based on the regulations, rather than defining a size where you're going to argue about whether the porch is a living space or not. So if you want to reduce the size of the structure, then you got a couple choices. Increase your side yards, so increase your setbacks, decrease your height. But bring that into something that is acceptable before we see Larch and Cougar Creek consumed by these 3,600 square foot houses that in fact are consuming my neighborhood in South Canmore. And that's fine, the bylaw allows for that and great, but it doesn't have to carry on. You have the ability to deal with that now.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Good evening, everyone, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Al Frederick. I'm a resident of the town of Canmore. I bought a property I have a question more than and a consideration for council as they deliberate. But I bought a property in Three Sisters about a year ago, and I have a 3-year window in which to build. So my question would be, is the old bylaw grandfathered in any way? Because I'm kind of in the middle of that. So that's my question. I hope you consider that.
Do you have contact information that you could leave, or
Certainly, I could do that.
if you don't mind just leaving that with municipal clerk, then planning will follow up with you for sure.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor Borman and town councilors, my name's Renee Boone. I'm a Canmore resident, and I have two major concerns with the proposed land use bylaw. The first is the reclassification of Quarry Lake Park from Natural Park NP to Public Use PD, and the second is the redefinition of Wildlands Conservation WC to Conservation of Wildlands CW. First of all, Quarry Lake should remain as NP. As a natural park district, Quarry Lake Park is only allowed low-level recreation uses such as trails, benches, picnic tables, and basic sanitary facilities. Use of the lake area as a public park is a discretionary use. Weddings, educational signs, and an off-leash dog area, in my mind, are appropriate uses of a public park. Visitors come not only from Canmore, but from all over to enjoy the beauty of a mountain lake that they can easily drive to and swim in without having to hike into. As a public use district, Quarry Lake Park would be opened up to the possibility of playgrounds, public and accessory buildings, athletic and recreational facilities, campgrounds, schools, etc., as discretionary uses. While there are the occasional swimming events in the lake, Quarry Lake has remained as natural a state as possible for a public park. From the 2014 Quarry Lake survey, results posted on the town's website, words like natural, park, lake, and beach are all highlighted as important to the community and as features that people want to keep the same. When asked about improvements that people would like to see, there is mention of washroom, but no other buildings. Even the word play structure took a minor role. I worry that if Quarry Lake Park were to become a PD district, the survey results may get lost in the wake of building unwanted public features, forever changing the natural state of Quarry Lake. There needs to be some mechanism in the proposed land use bylaw to protect Quarry Lake Park from the intrusive discretionary uses allowed in a PD district. Ideally, the unique NP zoning should be maintained because Quarry Lake is a unique, priceless gem that needs to be protected from development. Now, my concerns over changing WC to CW with new discretionary uses. The two districts, the current WC and the proposed CW, appear to be very similar. There are a few key differences under discretionary uses, though. Scientific research, trails for non-motorized use, and vegetation management have been removed from CW. However, accessory buildings and pedestrian pathways have been added to the proposed redesignation. I'm pleased that trails for non-motorized use have been removed in the CW district. Mountain bike users on those trails can have a significant impact on wildlife. However, how will the proposed CW account for existing trails currently being used by bikes? I'm also concerned that vegetation management has been removed. I think we should allow for fire-smart activities that could potentially fall under vegetation management. The addition of accessory buildings to discretionary uses is not a positive addition. Any development in the wildlands will adversely impact wildlife, both during construction and afterwards during use and maintenance. There should be no new buildings allowed in CW. I'm not sure what the term pedestrian pathways means. Are they dirt trails or are they paved and/or lit walkways? I think this should be defined and restricted so as to minimize their impact on these wildlands. Our wildlife corridors and habitat patches need to be protected. The discretionary uses in CW districts must be reviewed to ensure minimal impact on wildlife. I would like to see accessory buildings removed from the discretionary uses and a definition of pedestrian pathway to exclude paving and/or lighting. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leah Lachelt. I'm here with my husband, Ron. We're both residents of Canmore. We have a couple of concerns about the accessory dwelling units components of the bylaw. The first is regarding the inclusion of duplexes, and the second is an additional comment I have in general. So first of all, regarding duplexes, we know that single-family dwellings are quite different from duplexes in that single-family units have a separate physical location, they've got a separate fencing, there is setbacks, etc. And so in the unusual circumstance where you're not loving what your neighbor is doing on a Saturday night, you can ignore it generally. When you're in a duplex, there's way more shared space. You've got a common wall. What is it called? Party wall, that's the word I was thinking of. You're often sharing a backyard. It's very often a small backyard. There's usually a restrictive covenant that prevents any separation of the yard, so you can't have a fence or anything like that. You've got a shared driveway. So you're very much dependent on the goodwill and the good neighborly conduct of your duplex partners. Most often it works out great, but if you have a situation where you don't have that relationship with your duplex co-owner, or if you're adding additional tenants into that building through an accessory unit, the chances of it having a very significant impact on the other the other duplex party is quite significant, and so our objection is to having duplexes included and considered as if they were single-family dwellings, because they really are quite different. The second issue that we have, we know from, I think from experience and from media reports, that when there are problems with rentals in units, whether it's legal or illegal rentals, whether it's nightly, short-term, or long-term, very often the issues arise when the landlord does not actually live in the premises. That's when there's less ability to monitor tenants, to enforce bylaws, things like that. One of the things that we're concerned about is that if you allow accessory dwelling units in dwellings, regardless of whether it's a duplex or a single-family home, where it is not the landlord's principal residence, then you start opening up all kinds of potential issues with the landlord, excuse me, probably if they're absent, being unaware of any issues that may be happening with the tenant, that perhaps if you've got a tenant that's not adhering to bylaws, causing noise problems or parking issues or what have you, if the landlord is present and lives there, they are able to, they've got all kinds of avenues to be able to address issues through good neighborly conduct, good community social rules, things like that, using bylaw as a very last resort. If the landlord is not living on the premises or it's not their principal residence, they're probably not aware of any issues. And it's probably falling to the neighbors to be having to monitor and police it. That starts creating conflict with neighbors, puts neighbors in a position of having to police it and having to rely on a bylaw system that I think is, I would argue is probably not as resourced as it could be to be able to deal with the many issues that come up with rentals when you have a landlord not present. So I would like to recommend that the bylaw be limited to dwellings where the landlord has declared it as their principal residence, and then there's at least an opportunity for the usual social and community avenues to be used if there are any issues with tenants. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Page, and I'm a homeowner along with my wife. I'd like to address two areas. One is the accessory dwelling units. People in R1 neighborhoods may not want to have ADUs everywhere because of the congestion and parking problems that are going to result. Already people use their garage for storage. They park their vehicles on the street and their boats and trailers in the driveway. And if they have secondary suites, it means more street parking where people will pave their front yard to provide parking for tenants, and this is already being done Either way, we will have streets and yards full of vehicles, which I feel is unsafe for kids, riding their bikes, playing street hockey, and I also feel it's unsightly. After all, this is a town with tight restrictions on colors and types of signs, and I think surely our residential neighborhoods deserve as much attention. Now, the regulation also says that those closer to town won't need to provide a parking space. Do you really think that tenants living closer to town or the bus stop won't have a car? Of course they will, and again, we're looking at street congestion. Rather than increasing density everywhere, why not restrict it to areas that are already zoned to accept it? People who bought a home in an R1 district chose to do that because they wanted a safe place to raise their family and have some semblance of privacy and quiet. And I dare say they expected that it would remain zoned R1 forever. The second thing I want to address is the overall reduction to parking requirements and more bike parking. People will drive their cars, and no amount of bike parking will change that. People in Cougar Creek or Three Sisters will not hop on their bike and ride into town to get their groceries. They're not going to ride in the winter or when it's cold and rainy, so that's 60% of the time anyway, they won't be on their bike. The Seniors Club has over 800 members, and there are over 5,000 people in Canmore over the age of 50. And how many of them are going to give up their vehicle so they can ride their bike everywhere? Bus service is great, but there needs to be more routes and more frequent service. A lot of us have to walk a good distance to get to the bus stop. And again, you don't want your 80-year-old grandmother having to walk that far. The bike racks will be nearly empty for well over half the year. Think winter, rain, and cold again. I think the reduction in parking is really a policy based on wishful thinking. I think it ignores our demographics. It ignores our climate. I'm all for a safe place to lock up my bike. I'm all for expanded public transit. But most of us own vehicles, and we rely on them to drive to the trailhead for a hike, or to a restaurant for a meal, or into Calgary to do shopping or see family. So until there's a safe and warm and efficient alternative to the automobile, we're all going to continue to use them. And I think to believe otherwise reveals naivete rather than thoughtful planning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Tricia Botch, and I just want to express my opposition to Land Use Bylaw 2018-22. The magnitude of proposed changes to the town's land use bylaw is overwhelming, and the public's ability to fully scrutinize the changes are seriously compromised by the fact that there is no redlined version of the proposed changes to Canmore's current land use bylaw 2010 in relation to those proposed in land use bylaw 2018-22. Further clarity is needed when it comes to the land use update for the purpose of eliminating the sustainable screening process, which is now called a policy. I think incentivizing seems central to achieving the goals of the SSP through land use policy, given that we cannot legally mandate the provision of affordable housing, employee housing, and a lot of green construction that we desire. Density bonusing, building variances, parking variances, accessory dwelling units, zoning variances, expedited processing times, and fee reductions are all forms of incentives. I'd like to know how these are being factored into the land use bylaw and how these will affect my property. I'll skip through a lot of what I've written, but I'd appreciate if you took the time to read through my letter just to speed this up. I think many changes in the land use bylaw will affect established neighborhoods, and they are not explained. Each proposed change, no matter how small, must be clearly identified and fully justified. Are we creating loopholes in planning regulation that will result in the redevelopment of neighborhoods which is not understood? Will the use of ADUs in residential neighborhoods be the next outlet for employee housing? What about changes to administrative processes? Will things be fast-tracked into our neighborhood that we don't really understand what has changed? Just in closing, just specifically, I do support the maximum site coverage of all buildings in my area, which do to not exceed 40%, and I would like that to include the principal dwelling, attached ADUs, garages, including detached garages, accessory buildings which do not exceed 100 square feet. And I do not want variances applied for green buildings, for affordable housing, or for employee housing. I think you're going to end up with buildings a lot bigger than what you realize, even though you're putting on restrictions for height and width. I do not support the removal of clause 2.1.412, that is maximum density R1, the maximum residential, sorry, I can't see. The maximum residential density shall be 2 dwelling units per lot, one of which shall be the primary single-family detached resident, and the second of which may consist of 1 secondary unit or 1 garden suite, for which a valid development permit exists. I'm concerned that that opens up the door to multi-unit developments being proposed without us realizing. I do not support accessory buildings as they are as a permitted use which exceed 100 square feet. I do not support detached ADUs. These buildings are massive and they change the character of our community. No removal of statutory declaration requirements for owner occupancy within the principal resident of a dwelling with an ADU. No use of ADUs for employee housing. No reduction of parking requirements for ADUs. No parking reductions based on proximity to a bus route or downtown. No parking reductions to established neighborhoods based on proximity zones to downtown. And I also question the use of roof gardens in R1, and I question how that's going to complement affordability. So smaller, more digestible, redlined amendments to our current land use bylaw 2210 with separate public hearings are critical. At present, I do see potential in changes in this land use, but I do not support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of administration, and the public at large. My name is John Brownlee. I am the current president of the Canmore Hotel and Lodging Association. With regards to the land use bylaw, we went to our membership last month, and obviously, accommodation sector is mentioned quite prominently in this document, and we figured it in our best interest to examine it quite closely. And we can safely say that the CHLA, the Canmore Hotel and Lodging Association, is not opposed to being required to provide employee housing. Indeed, we've always done this in a very responsible manner for decades, not just here in Canmore, but also in the Bow Valley in general. We run a pretty tight ship, I would like to think, all of our associate members. And we believe in supplying employee housing. If we did not, we wouldn't be able to run our businesses successfully, and it's important that they have good work-life balance. We are opposed to the land use bylaw in its current form as it pertains to requirements of the hotels and the accommodation sector in general. We're much opposed to how the hotel sector, the accommodation sector, is singled out as the only industry in town that's going to be required by law to provide employee housing. We believe consultation with our industry is imperative if we're going to be mentioned in a bylaw like this in such a large manner. We are opposed to the idea of having on-site employee housing, and I think the reasons are very obvious for us as hoteliers. Primarily, you have no work-life separation at all for employees. There is no integration of the employees into the town. Indeed, they are siloed into that particular piece of land. And they will get knocks in the middle of the night asking what the password for the computer is and all kinds of other things. They'll bump into guests while they're in their civilian clothes, and it's the person that they checked in earlier, and they're asking them questions about all kinds of things, and they're on their own time. It's their time, and yet they've bumped into this guest, and now they're forced to work. It's problematic for the success of a hotel business. A guest comes to the valley to enjoy the town, to enjoy the mountains, to enjoy nature, peace and quiet, and if they're bumping into staff all over that particular piece of land, well, that also is problematic for guests. I think, TripAdvisor reviews would just be quite something based on what they might see. This is arguably also a deterrent to investment. Some potential hotel companies might see this as problematic, and I know that a lot of our members do, and they already have experience in this regard in other areas of the Bow Valley where they are required to have on-site staff housing, and I've seen it myself personally in my own hotel experience, and it's never really been successful. I'd really like to thank Ron Rempel and Ron Casey for mentioning all of their concerns, because we completely agree with them. We just don't see this as a workable solution. Now, having said that, we urge that there be consultation with our industry. It does affect us directly. We also urge that this process be fair. It should not just be targeting the hotel industry. I'm sorry, but it comes across as us being the low-hanging fruit. And I don't like to put it in those terms, but we don't want to be seen as the easy answer. And we're not the largest user of affordable housing in the town. There are many other businesses that have uses that rival ours. And in doing so, what we would like to do is offer our hand. We really want to reach out and work together with the town and administration to come up with a workable solution. We are not opposed to employee housing. We want to provide that for our staff. We've always done that. We just want to do this in a fair and equitable way, and we urge that there be a consultation process at this point. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, good evening. My name is Kimberly Carkery, and I am the co-owner of EE Motors Sales, located in the Industrial District IND2 with proposed changes in the bylaw. I'm here to speak in favor of the proposed change to the bylaw that will include the discretionary use of automotive sales and rentals to a maximum of 4,000 square meters of site area. It's obvious that I would be in favor of this change, as it is currently where I conduct business, and despite working diligently with planning to be compliant, fought a development appeal in late 2018 to continue doing business. But I want to speak to the growing challenges for anyone engaging in business activities that are restricted to industrial use areas. As the town plans for growth in residential and tourism areas, there's no perceived planned expansion for any light industrial or general industrial land use to allow for the type of businesses that would be restricted to those areas, understanding that many of those uses continue to be discretionary. With the increase in the permanent and semi-permanent population base, there will be an increase in demand for those services, and there will be minimal to no increase in the number or size of businesses providing those services. I've been presented with a number of clients who were happy they did not have to go elsewhere to find what they were looking for, and that they didn't have to fight the traffic and challenges of the city. I perceive the problem as twofold with respect to available land and zoning for industrial use. There's land available in other districts, but it is currently owned by very few people, one in particular with land recently listed at exorbitant values compared to recent market evaluations. This is not conducive to allowing small, independent businesses to flourish, provide affordable services, and add to the tax base for the town. The locations currently zoned for automotive sales are in one of the more expensive land areas, with limited availability for land or space. Some of the land previously mentioned is in the Southern Business District, and this continues to be restrictive for small, independent, growing businesses. Small, light industrial, and industrial business face many of the same challenges as those who seek affordable housing. There's been some perception we're removing space from other industrial use. However, we have taken a property that has been inoperable and aging for 3 years and turned it into a viable, usable business space. We currently serve a population base that is not looking for a new car, but rather a new-to-them vehicle with value and quality as part of the process. We also offer a local girl-next-door approach with respect to the experience. This is not something a big box dealer necessarily provides, nor do they provide the inventory our clients are looking for. We have filled a niche and only wish to continue serving our client base and growing our business in a town that we love without threat of closure, understanding that any area we attempt to operate in will be discretionary and subject to the review by planning. It's challenging when you know you have something that people are happy you're offering, and yet the availability of space that is deemed appropriate is minimal. So I ask that you consider going forward with the proposed change. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rick Daniel, and I'm a permanent resident of Canmore and have been for quite a number of years. I haven't made a written submission, but I will leave behind a one-page summary of my comments and hope you'll read it. You probably don't often get one-page submissions. I'm generally supportive of most of the changes to the proposed changes to the land use bylaw, so I want to restrict my comments to one clause that I think is problematic and it probably would have unintended consequences that really go against a lot of the town's other policies. I'm referring to section 2.1.4.10 of the proposed land use bylaw, which would restrict the maximum gross floor area of single-family homes to 325 square meters on lots of under 390 square meters. I recommend that this section simply be deleted from the proposed bylaw. The first reason for that is that the only justification that I have seen for that clause is to reduce overall house size and house massing, but it doesn't do that. The restrictions that you already have in place in terms of lot coverage, which limit lot coverage to 40% for single-family homes, and to height of buildings, and the new proposals around the envelope model, those are what determine the mass of a building. Quite simply, the mass is the aerial extent times the height. You already have that defined in the regulations without adding this limitation on interior square footage. What the new regulation would do, it would do nothing in terms of limiting the size, the exterior size and massing of the house. It would restrict the ability of the homeowner to efficiently use the space within that envelope. In other words, to create the maximum amount of habitable floor area. Because that square footage calculation is based on habitable floor area, which excludes garages and does not include the area taken up, for example, by vaulted ceilings or very high ceilings. What it does is basically work against a lot of the other objectives that the town has of encouraging density, encouraging the development of secondary suites, encouraging energy efficient homes, and encouraging the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Let me explain by way of an example. You've got two houses side by side, identical in terms of their extent and their height and their shape, absolutely identical from the outside. One house is designed to be energy efficient. It's a two-story home with modest ceilings, 8-foot ceilings, a single-car garage. That house may exceed the 325 square meters. The house next door, identical size and shape, has a two-car garage. And instead of 2 floors with modest ceilings, it uses part of its space for massive vaulted ceilings. It would have much lower habitable floor area. So it could get under the 25 square meter restriction. But it would be less energy efficient. It would have less density in terms of habitable floor space and would be less suitable for the development of secondary suites. So by adding on this duplication in terms of house sizes, which does nothing to control house massing, you are actually working against many of the town's other policies. I think the same point was made to a certain extent, maybe not identical to what I'm saying, but I think Ron Rempel and Ron Casey touched on this to some extent as well. You've already got the controls over massing. This addition of a control over the internal use of that space is unnecessary at best and counterproductive at worst. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Caldera and living in Canmore for 30 years and doing the business. And I want you to do one thing for a minute. Just close your eyes and open it again. And look around the room, what you're going to see. Mature, well-to-do, educated people. You're not going to see the people you're talking about, the young people, the working people, the people's no voice from them. You can't see them where they are, in their holes somewhere. If you're going to create a staff housing, you're going to create slavery. Slavery is no different than controlling the person 24/7. If you're going to create a staff housing, you have to give them the respect, you have to give them the freedom to choose, the employer freedom to choose where they live. This is who serves the town. You don't have a housing problem. You have more real estate agents in town for housing to sell than people need it. Why don't you have an agent for the people who really need the housing? Why don't you have an open house? Why don't you have an open town hall meeting where these young people can come and tell you what they need, not what you think they need? We always predict and we always project, but reality is always different. Reality is looking in their eyes and listening through their voice. You have to spend a lot more time, effort, money taking care of the problem. It's not going to take care of its own. 30 years ago, we had the same issue. 30 years later, we have the same issue. When the paper used to come out 30 years ago, people used to run to the paper to look for accommodation. Guess what, 30 years later? One get advertised, there are 100 people lining up. So again, it's not a housing problem, it's the problem for the people who cannot afford it. But make sure you have a co-op housing if you're going to have something, so that you give the people the freedom to live the way they want, the respect they deserve. You know, they can call somebody to their home, friend in the night, without worrying about it, that they are going to be penalized tomorrow morning. Or the speakers you had before, Ron and other people who are telling you, do not create this bureaucracy more outside the town with the employers on top of it. I did have a staff housing. I ended up giving it away. I had it in Banff. Why? Because I was getting phone calls in the middle of the night. Something is going wrong there. I worked all day. I don't want to go there in the middle of the night to settle a dispute among the employees. Why? These are the people. Please pay more attention, close attention to them. Do not just write them off. Do not just talk about them. Do something proactively, reactively, and now. It's too late already. So my suggestion to the town is, before you make the bylaws, before you make the 10 years future bylaws, consult these people, talk to them. You know, maybe you will find out the reality. Reality is a lot different than the perception. And I don't want you to give them direction, give the direction to the planning commission. It's not 5 people to a room, there should be only maybe 1, maximum 2 people. Universities have done it for years. Big institutions have done it. They have 30, 40,000 students. So take example from their book, do something right. You have one chance to do it. We haven't been able to do it for the last 30 years. Please take this chance and make the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Worship, members of council, Steve DeKaiser. Starting to feel like old man time here coming by to remind you of ancient history that happened in the 1990s or 2000s, but I'm sure you're interested and will listen. I have a fairly simple, straightforward request in terms of one regulation and one district of the land use bylaw. Current regulation in the wildland conservation, which I guess will be the Conservation of Wildland District, there's a requirement for progressive reclamation of any quarries in the town. As most of you probably know, there's only one quarry in town, Thunderstone Quarry. A lot of people don't even realize it's within the town of Canmore, but it is. And that regulation was put in when the Wildland Conservation District was created in the 1990s, and it applies to the Kananaskis Gun Club, it applies to the Banff Gate Resort, and it applies to Thunderstone Quarries, because the intent is in the long term, especially for the quarry, once the quarry is depleted, that it will be reclaimed and again be useful for wildlife movement between Wind Valley and the Bow Flats habitat patches. And as recently as I'd like to show a map if I could. As recently as 2015, Council recognized the importance of this area for wildlife movement because Council took the MD of Bighorn to court, sorry, not to court, to the Municipal Government Board in 2015 for a proposed expansion of development of Dead Man's Flats. Here's Dead Man's Flats. Here's the proposed development. And you can see it labeled up there, the existing footprint of the Thunderstone Quarry. So again, the intent of the Wildlife Conservation District is for the long-term use of these areas for wildland conservation. And to do that, this regulation for reclamation, progressive reclamation, needs to be retained. As I understand it from administration, the intent was to remove it from this district and put it into the general regulation section of the land use bylaw. But really, there's only one quarry in town and is sitting in the middle of an area that council's already recognized and taken the MD Bighorn Municipal Government Board for the importance of it, that it should be reclaimed. Now, I recognize that Three Sisters would like to incorporate this into their future building. That red line is the current growth boundary of the town. And obviously, at some point, council may decide, I hope not, but may decide to rezone this area for development. However, as long as it's zoned wildland conservation or conservation of wildland, then this progressive reclamation should be part of those regulations. It's part of the development permit for the quarry now, and it has been for over 20 years. Quarry Lake has already been mentioned. That's a reclaimed mine site. The meadow, so-called meadow in the Nordic Center, that's a reclaimed mine site. A good part of the deserted Three Sisters Golf Course and Three Sisters Resort, a good part of that golf course is reclaimed mine site. Lafarge, Burnco, Greymont, all those rock industries in the Bow Valley do progressive reclamation. It's standard in the industry. It's not a surprise. These requirements have been here for 20 years. Please keep it right in the land use district where future administrations, future councils won't lose track of it. And keep it there so that at least the opportunity for that long-term wildlife movement is retained. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have 20 more seconds. I do have a detailed copy both of the town's appeal to the Municipal Government Board on this issue with the maps in the written submission that I've given to the Municipal Secretary.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, everyone assembled. My name is Michael Hannon. I represent H2 Development Group. We own the Coast Hotel, and we're also in process of building 89 rental accommodation units right now behind the Coast Hotel to accommodate a need for long-term stable rental accommodation in the Canmore market. I just want to reiterate a couple of points. Many of them have already been made tonight by John Brownlee at, can you not hear me? John Brownlee at the CHLA and also Ron Rempel at BODA. I find the bylaws constructed is very prescriptive, and if we're trying to address housing, then we should have a broad community effort and not necessarily single out one industry and one geography to try and tackle that. An employee is an employee, and a housing unit is a housing unit. So irrespective of whether you're a hotel, you're a large national retailer, you are a town of Canmore, well, you're a professional services industry, those people are all employees and they all need housing. And I think that all, if we're going to put a requirement on people to provide housing, it should be broad-based and everybody should be subject to it, not just one industry. Second, where we put these, I think, could have unintended consequences. John spoke to that. The concern I would have is, he called it siloing employees beside hotels and the work-life balance, but it's almost a ghettoization. And it will not lead to integration in the community. And if employers are going to provide housing, they should be able to provide that anywhere in town. So if you're going to, build a new hotel or a new store, then you can get, provide employee accommodation, but you should be able to do that anywhere in town and just be able to provide those units and not have to be right beside the place of business, which would also, in the case of the way the current law is drafted, I think negatively impact the overall guest experience. Really, I think it should be a broad community effort. It shouldn't just be hotels, it should be everyone, and the geography should be the town of Canmore, not immediately adjacent to the employer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Vijay Domingo. I'm just here actually as a resident. And I only, with 5 minutes, thought I should only talk about maybe one item, maybe two. Maybe I should just start with Michael's comment there. Maybe the last thing I was just going to mention, because we talked about barriers to entry and things like that, but I was kind of reminiscing back in the day when developers were considered a bit of the low-hanging fruit, and we were looking at some solutions for providing recreational facilities and things for the town. And the rec levy came in as a voluntary item. And I just want to remind council and perhaps this community that industry really cares about the place that we live in. And I think those conversations can be very healthy and very wonderful and can lead to some voluntary things that can happen when you allow that opportunity, especially when it comes to affordable housing, because it's something that we all have to deal with as business owners and as community members. So I think it's obvious the challenge that we're having is really how to implement that. Which brings me to really where I wanted to focus on is really on the R1S or basically taking and looking to apply things over the whole valley. one comment that I have is some of the things we do might be actually in contradiction, but we don't realize that now until we get into it. And I'm not here to talk about fear because I want to provide some recommendations. But for example, by allowing that in all areas, you allow additional revenue. And when you allow additional revenue in a location, you could actually increase the value of it. And so we might be actually doing something a little bit opposite for home ownership and forcing people into rental accommodations as the only future, which is why a lot of people actually leave this valley, is because they can't purchase something here. The other part of it too is we all kind of live in areas that have non-conforming suites, and I think that's something that to some extent is culturally a bit acceptable. Maybe it's not always good in some areas. I don't want to have it, but it does exist. One recommendation that could be looked at is how we have bed and breakfasts in a lot of our communities as an industry, but it's done by an application, a permit. People invest a lot of money into those businesses. With that investment comes great responsibility. And this could be another way of managing that issue. Now, I'm not suggesting that we change the tax base. It is a revenue-based situation for the homeowner, but it also is more of a compliance that the residents know that there must be responsible living, of which I think the majority of this community does do. I'm going to actually go a little bit further. I only have a couple minutes left. One of the challenges is I was looking at the bylaw, and again, I'm a bit more holistic person to look at these things rather than the details, but I was forecasting and thinking, you know, it's already been presented by council. When you take a look at the future of Canmore, there'll be 30,000 people living here. You can see it on a map. And I think we need to think about that a little bit in these types of changes, especially the level of change, and this is why I only wanted to talk about one item. But in that 30,000 population, that scares many people, but it's on a map and you can see it, and I think we have to think about where we want to end up. And right now the hot topic is employee housing or affordable housing, and giving the whole town the ability to build accessory units. It could be the complete opposite, where later on our big issue is going to be overpopulation, because we took a town that was maxed at 30 and made it 35,000. These are the long-term things that need to be looked at when we're looking at a bylaw of this change, because I didn't see enough layering in the options that were provided, and this is why I'm talking about it. The last thing, I only have a minute and 30 seconds, it's like overtime, 5 minutes, is really talking about parking, because it comes out in every single topic and it's very passionate. And the reason why I'm talking about 30,000 people is I think our community and our council at times needs to, and our administration, we need to really think that we are actually a city, and we're going to be one, and we actually legally could be one right now. And as much as we don't talk in those terms, I think it's something we have to really get a handle of, both culturally and administratively. And I'm talking about solutions that occur in other communities, and even as I was in Singapore, that had a very dynamic laid out, and it's about parking permits. Parking permits are commonly used. They provide control in areas that need control, and they don't exist in areas that don't need it. They can be provided to residents that locals that don't want to pay for parking but can have access, and those that come that have to pay for it if they don't have that permit. Again, there are so many different versions. Again, I'm thinking about Singapore, that depending how close you are to the city center, that's the color of your tag, and you have to pay a certain price for it. So I just wanted to just really comment that there's a bit of a higher level thing for me when I was looking at this document, that I think not so much are in the document, but I think it's a reflection for council to take a look at the approach alongside with administration over kind of the long term of what this will look like when we're all done. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't have the cooties.
Thank you so much.
You might. I don't.
I hope I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor and Council, my name is Scott McGee. I've been a resident homeowner of Canmore for 15 years, since 2003. And perhaps it's appropriate I'm the last submission here tonight, because I just simply want to state thank you for undertaking the difficult and necessary process of revising this land use bylaw. I've approached it several times, and I find it difficult to understand often, difficult to read, difficult to work through, and I'm glad you're doing this to try to make that easier for myself and for everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. Not quite the last to speak, though.
Maybe last but not least. My name's Corinne Despay. I've lived in the Valley for well over 30 years. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I do understand that this LUB is a very difficult thing for the councillors to go through. I found it very overwhelming to find out that there's over 600 pages of it to try to go through. I certainly don't agree with a number of items that are in it, but I think two of them, and they have been mentioned, but I just wanted to emphasize that they are important. The one is the parking issue. As the one gentleman stated, you know, you're right. For people that are working in town, for them to take the bus or walk or take their bike Monday to Friday to go to work is not a problem. I don't think it's realistic to believe that people do not have a vehicle to go skiing on the weekends or to go hiking. A big reason why a lot of us ever moved to the mountains was for that. And I know in the 33 years I've lived in this valley, I've had a car for 32. And it's not because I need it to get to work. It's because I've needed it to get away on the weekends and get away from work. The other concern that I have is with these accessory dwellings that are being allowed. My concern, part of it is the parking, that if you're living close to town or you're living close to a bus stop, which those bus stops can change, that people don't require, there's no parking that's required. If we look at some of the areas now where these accessory dwellings would be allowed, Marine Road, Riverstone Road, where there are paved alleyways already. I don't know how many of you live in those areas, but they already have huge parking congestions. Those streets, Riverstone and Marine, are both extremely narrow roads. There may be one vehicle that's parked in front for somebody, and the back are double parked. People have garages. Most of them do not park in their garage, so it's already a huge issue. The other big concern I have with these is the height of the allowable dwellings, the discretionary loft that can be put into them. I know I paid a lot of money for the house that I live in here, whether that was 20 years ago when I moved here or whether it's now. And part of the reason why I bought where I did was because I wanted to see the mountains. I didn't want to look at my neighbor next door the way I could if I lived in the city. So a lot of us are paying a lot of money for that. And if you're coming along now and saying that the garage across the back alley from me can be changed so that the height is higher, or as well being in the Cougar Creek area because of where the building restrictions might be, there's talk of, you know, buildings that have to be up higher. Perfect example could be a home that is currently being built on Riverstone right now, which we didn't think any buildings were being allowed to be built, but they are. So, you know, we look at this new property, and honestly, the front door is in the middle of the house, and they need about 15 to 20 steps to get to that front door. Is that what, if that's the new building that's coming on board, does that mean that that accessory building is now going to be, the main floor is going to be 10 or 20 steps up above grade level, which means that now that discretionary 1.5 story building is going to be completely taking out any views that were there, which then means the value of my house has gone down significantly. So I just, again, I was trying to get some answers into the height of these buildings and et cetera. There are some pictures that are in the land use bylaw. They are difficult to read, some of the measurements that are on them. But they're both very big concerns. You know, regardless of where you live in town, you want to be able to look out your window and see a mountain somewhere. That's part of the quality of life that we pay for. That's why we pay the big bucks to live here, right? Is the views, is the access to be able to get out and to play in those views. And a part of your land use bylaw is taking away both of those. Since I've got 46 seconds left, I'll just touch a little bit on the employee housing or the affordable housing. I agree that there needs to be affordable housing. However, I do not believe that it is the taxpayer's responsibility to subsidize that. And that's pretty much exactly what we're doing now with our perpetually affordable housing. There's things that are going on where we're spending lots of money duplicating existing services. And just the quick one on this is the Palliser Trail, where there's $1.3 million to put in a new trail system that'll be right where the Mustache lands or the peaks of Canmore. There's an existing trail right across the street. Why don't we take that 1.3 and put it towards the underpass or the bridge that we know is going to be needed through there for accommodation? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor Borman and councillors, my name is Carol Beaton, and I own a very small business that's just down in Kananaskis Way, tucked away, and barely visible from the road. We've had lots of conversations, Mayor and planners, and my biggest concern is the sandwich board sign bylaw that I would like to see revisited. I know it's been kind of put away for changes coming up, but I'd like to see more talk about it, because I really would like my business to thrive down Kananaskis Way and not have to move my business because I can't have signage out there. And yeah, I would just like to have more conversation about that. And I would like to see if it was possible to be able to change the bylaws so that, I know nobody wants sandwich board signs downtown, but perhaps outside the downtown core, that they'd be allowed for businesses such as mine that are tucked away, that are hard to find. And I don't understand why that's not an option, but I'd like to be able to talk more about that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Naya Noyes West. I grew up here. Naya West. So the first issue I have with the new land use bylaw is, as was stated before, the change in designation of Quarry Lake Park, the quarry, because I grew up using that park and it was important to me. And growing up in this town, I kind of foolishly thought that I would raise a family here and that they would enjoy the same privileges that I did. Clearly, that's incorrect, as many parks that my friends and I used are already gone. The only explanation that has been given to me, and it has been given to me by several members on the planning and administrative teams, as well as by the editor of the Rocky Mountain Outlook, was that the only reason that this change is being made is because it is too complicated to have an area of town that has a different designation than every other area of town. The Natural Park District is unique. I was told that this is too complicated, that your planning team and your administration cannot handle, is not competent. This is what they told me. They told me that they themselves are not competent enough to work with a district that is unique from every other district. And maybe I'm not understanding how complicated it must be for the past, I don't know how many years, that has been the natural and the only natural park district to deal with this uniqueness. But I think this is a town full of unique things. And I think if you can't figure out how to deal with unique things, I don't know, maybe diversity and having uniqueness in this town isn't your goal. And I don't know why our taxes are going up, the taxes of the people who already live here and are trying to continue to live here are going up, just so that we can pay for more people who still yet don't understand how to handle uniqueness and unique designations in districts such as the Natural Park District. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why you need to change it because you can't handle it. I don't know why you're hiring more people who can't handle it. It's a unique place. It's a special place. It deserves a unique designation. Thanks.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak this evening? You sure nobody else wants to speak at this time? I'll just ask one last time. Anybody else care to come to the mic? Seeing no takers, I'll look to administration to ask if there's any final comments. Nope. In which case, I'll now adjourn the public hearing. Thanks for being here.